of tonight and our session. So firstly, I have to thank Hans Zomer and James Green for joining us on this session. I'll talk a little bit about them in a moment. Some of you might know I'm a marketeer by profession, and over the past couple of months, I've been exploring, reading and various things about behaviour science, like how can I use my marketing knowledge, which is persuading people to buy new stuff or buy more of the same stuff. How can I apply that kind of ways of working into my cycling work and sustainability work? And I'm just really curious of how I could apply that kind of, making people make more sustainable choices. I was at a talk a while ago and there was an example about behaviour science, about a hotel, an experiment that was done in a hotel about those signs of like, hang up your towels, or if you want to reuse them, or leave them in the bath if you want new ones. And behaviour change scientists put different messages in different rooms to see what messages would have impact. And by saying things like 75% of the people who stay in this room reuse their towels, the towel reusage went up. So I thought that was really interesting. It's not just about the facts, it's not just about save water, reuse your towel. It's about letting people know that everybody else is reusing their towels. And that shows the importance in behaviour science of knowing what everyone else is doing and the norms and what is socially acceptable. That we're people, we don't just are driven by facts, we need other ways to persuade us to make changes. So I think that's really important for us as cyclists. I think about the reason why I switched from being a predominantly a car user, which you've heard me talk about in the past. I want to drive everywhere. And it was when there was a moment to trigger in my life when I changed jobs that enabled me to change my reasons for transport. And what are those triggers, and how can we be involved in those points with people to make the change for cycling? So I'm really excited to have James and Hans here with us to speak. Especially since I do a bit of the spokesperson stuff and I'm on the radio. I'm really curious about what the guys are going to say to us today so that I can take notes, and then when we're doing our communications we can use those prompts to build our message wider. So I'll tell you a little bit about our speakers. I've swiped them things from LinkedIn and from their bios. Let's see if what they wrote about themselves is right and if they approve. So first we have Hans Zomer, who's CEO of Global Action Plan Ireland, which is an organisation which is part of a global network. There's in 13 countries and 14 branches about education for sustainable development and sustainable behaviour change, including things like carbon neutral households, communities and workplaces. He leads the team based in Access Ballymun about all of their Irish work. He's previously worked in many NGOs around the world and has been the spokesperson for the President of Ireland. So I'm sure he has some stories to tell us, some for example. And he's a communicator who knows that in order to make the changes we need in society, it's about individuals, but communication, the change, and the power of politics. So I'm really excited to have Hans with us. So thank you very much. And then we have James Green, who's Dr. James Green, who's a lecturer in health physiology from UL. He's come up from UL to join us. So thanks a million for making the trek. He works about data, about people, both qualitative and quantitative. He's lots of interdisciplinary interests, but he likes making connections across different areas and finding new insights. He's currently leading a project promoting the inclusive and sustainable uptake of ebikes. And previously he's worked on data from everything from the taste and flavour of Sauvignon Blanc, perceptions of English accents, and whether rugby players report concussion. So I think we're in for an interesting evening. I was like, I'm taking the Sauvignon Blanc one. I'll find out more about that one afterwards in the bar. So so the two guys are hopefully going to share some insights with us about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll wrap up with some quick Q&A. And over to Hans first.
Thank you very much. It seems to me that Una would be a very good person to be our guest speaker.
I'll return the
favor. The things you said, I was going to say, but my name is Hans. As you can tell from my accent and my name, I'm not Irish by birth. I'm a Dutchman. That did not last Sunday. Sorry about that. And I'm a political scientist by training. I've worked in overseas aid most of my life, but when I moved to Ireland in 2001, I ended up being the first CEO of DOCUS, the umbrella group of aid agencies here. And I've always been fascinated by how you bring about societal change. I don't have answers, but I certainly have a lot of questions and suggestions, I suppose. But yeah, so after doing that in DOCUS for 13 years, I had the honor of being spokesperson for Michael Higgins, which really gave me another insight into, lobbying, advocacy, political process, etc. That was really good. But after 6 years, he had nearly killed me with his energy and 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. It was too much. But also I felt it was important to try and go back to a bit more of a grassroots direct impact. President does what he does really, really well, but ultimately it's at a symbolism level, and I was looking for the more cold face there. So I ended up at Global Action Plan, an environmental behaviour change organization, and I start with Mr. Freud there, because how do we bring about societal change? And I think one of the unfortunate things in Ireland is that we listen to economists too much. The economists have ideas based on a very narrow interpretation of what a human being is. And a human being is out there to maximize profit and maximize gain from their decisions. I think luckily, we're not rational beings. We're not just going, well, this is cheaper and that is more beneficial to me. We make decisions on a whole lot of reasons, and you mentioned that it's ultimately about being a social person. So there are norms, values, expectations from our peers. There are also power dynamics of the political side, and we just have tended to ignore those too much in my work. So hopefully we can redress that a little bit. So with the next slide there, please. I don't know if you can see that. It says, "Don't think of a polar bear." It's a play on the book by George Lakoff. Yeah, he said, "Don't think of an elephant." It's a book that was written about framing. How do you describe an issue, and the language you use has implications for how you discuss the issue. There are all kinds of assumptions in the words that you're using, but also words trigger stuff in our brains. So they've done some work, quite a bit of research on framing and the values that are connected with it. So if I say you're the best, I think I'm saying to be nice to you. But in your brain, what's going on is it triggers values related to competition. And so while I think I'm saying something positive, I'm actually having a secondary effect on you, apart from the saying that I'm the best. But it sort of reinforces that competition is a good thing. So everything we say, everything I say, triggers stuff in your brain. It's very hard for me to know exactly what kind of thing. So the languages we use, the words we use, the concepts we use, they have political significance, but also emotional significance. And we need to just, maybe now we can borrow from advertisers, etc. They know exactly that's what words, what colors, what they trigger. So I use the polar bear here because I think in the environmental movement, we've made some significant mistakes. And one was when we started talking about climate change, we started talking about the bloody polar bears. Now, as you said in your introduction, we work in Ballymun, or that's one of the areas we work. I can tell you that the health and well-being of polar bears is not high on the list of what people in Ballymun worry about. So me talking about climate change triggers in their mind the image of the bloody polar bear. And it doesn't matter what I say, I've already lost my audience. So let's be careful about how we frame what the issue is. And so maybe bounce that back to yourselves. When we were chatting earlier, the Dublin Cycling Initiative, your campaign, sorry. Scary, very, very scary cycling initiative. You are the campaign. Interesting difference. But so is the issue that we need to get more people on bikes? Or is the issue that we want a healthier city, a more livable city? Is it that we want better transport? We've done the news earlier. So what is the the issue that is at the root of it. I'm not saying that you've chosen wrong by saying, well, the issue is we just want more people to cycle, but you actually have to think a little bit, take a step back, because you're the hammer that's looking for a nail. The solution to any problem is more cyclists. That's not serious, but I suppose the important message is, how do you frame what you're talking about? The next one, please. So instead of polar bears, I want you to come away from this evening thinking of amoebas. So they're the little single cellular beings. We use this as a model of describing what it is we at Global Action Plan want to do. So, and we believe, actually you mentioned Michael Higgins, I had a running debate with him about how do we affect societal change. I've never won the debate, of course, but I'm a fundamental believer that societal change happens because we change values and norms. We change the way we think about stuff. We change our expectations from each other, and that translates into changed policies, etc. There are others in the environmental world who say, no, the way things change is by changing the policies, and then you're changing the incentives, and therefore you get changed behavior. Michael D has his theory of change is, well, you change the concepts, which is fundamentally an academic, it's the way how you talk about stuff, how you frame stuff. But I believe that norms and values affect behavior, and also the other way around. So what we're looking at is, if you describe society as a sort of a blob, there's an outer ring to the blob, and that's basically behavior outside that ring is beyond the pale. We have a norm. So in Ireland, say for instance, core, a nuclear family, husband, wife, 2 children. That's the norm. Of course, there's loads of other variations of that, and they're all socially acceptable. But what is socially acceptable changes over time. We've luckily seen a phenomenal change over that in the last 20 years. So there's behavior that's beyond the pale, there's behavior that is a bit odd but acceptable, and then there's the norm. So what happens is, if people start to push against the outer rim, don't know if this, I should have put that in as there's a little video of a pop concert, and there's one guy who starts to dance, and you can see everybody going, that guy, he's crazy. Look at him, weirdo, dancing on his own. Everybody else is just sitting politely. And then there's a second person who joins the dance. And now the dancing has become a movement. There's 2 odd ones. Okay? A third one joins, 5 people. Now we have a group of people dancing. And it's a 2-3 minute video, but eventually the whole place is dancing. So what has happened is that totally odd and weird and virtually unacceptable behavior became the norm. And so we've been looking at research, and so once people start pushing at the rim of what is acceptable, you get all kinds of stuff happening. The whole amoeba starts to vibrate. People are starting to push back, saying no, we have to go the other way. Other people are joining so once you get to about 10 to 15% of the population establishing different behavior, the amoeba, so that's what is in the second picture, the amoeba starts to change shape, and as a result, the norm moves along with it. So the challenge that we have is to try and get that amoeba, which is us, to move. I think that's what I wanted to say to this slide. I started with saying, we make our decisions, and our lifestyle choices on lots of grounds, but actually the most common one is habits. It's just sheer habit. We've always done like that. You don't want to think. I'm going into the supermarket. I don't want to think what I need. I just buy the stuff that I always buy. When I walk around to work, I take the same route as I always take because I can switch up the brain. What I watch on the telly, all of these little decisions that we make hundreds of times a day, 99% of those are just habits. And that we need that. But so people will find that comforting. And actually, if we're honest, nobody really likes change. There was once at the conference, and the guy said, it was an American who said the only person that likes change is a baby with a dirty diaper. And there is something to that. Like change is actually. They don't want to change that. Yeah. So change is painful, and so anybody who's arguing for societal change has to acknowledge that you're trying to change something which is comfortable. I also said change or a behavior depends on social norms, and I said that our behavior is based on our values, but it's also the other way around. Our actions can, in fact, inform our norms. The economists are a bit right in that there is also an element about benefits, and the benefits can be monetary, but they can be in all kinds of. But basically, most of the societal change type things, they are a trade-off. And there is a famous social dilemma. Like I don't mind, having to pay more taxes if I know everybody else is as well, So I don't want to be the first one. Like I'm paying the RT license fee, and I feel like a dummy. There's nothing wrong with the license fee, but it becomes a problem if I feel that I'm the only one who's dumb enough to pay it. So this is also, it's about, and there's another element there about fairness. Like again, if there are costs involved to a change, so if I change, okay, that's okay. As long as I think that those costs are distributed equally or equitably, it doesn't have to be even. And we can have lots of discussions about what that means equitably, but that as a principle, most humans make their decisions based on on those. And it's also about credibility. So if the Dublin Cycling Campaign argue that everybody needs to get on the bike because they get 10 cents for every bike that passes them, your credibility is undermined. You're just in it for yourself. I'm not going to listen to you anymore. Or say farmers associations, so people will respond to credibility, to honesty. And finally, there's I couldn't put all of this, but this is my favorite: temporal discounting. So I know there are benefits to changing. Most of those are future benefits, but I have comfort now. Get out of my car. I know it's really good for society. We drove Jesus, I need to go to shop in the car. So my actions are, yes, they are informed by habits, values, etc. But there's also a trade-off. We talked about taking the ferry to France. I'm looking at taking the ferry to Amsterdam, where my daughter studies. Journey, I don't mind the time, but it's very expensive. It's a major investment for me. How can that compete to Ryanair getting me there for 40 euros? So these are all sort of ideas that inform our decisions as human beings. And people much smarter than me have developed all kind of models to try and reflect that. So there's two of them. One is that's really one of the top is very much about the rational approach. I take a decision to make it. And the other one sort of tries to group that blur of concepts that I mentioned into something a bit more rational. James will have much more to say on that. Okay, the next slide, please. So, because I try to keep things simple, so I reduce things to 3 words as much as I can. And so when I think about behavior change, how do you change people's behavior? You really need to think about 3 things: knowledge, opportunity, and motivation. And again, in the environmental sector, we've made the mistake that we thought it was all about knowledge. Like, how many times have you been in a committee and somebody said, we need an awareness raising campaign? Like, the world would have been perfect if all the awareness raising campaigns we have done in the past actually worked. Clearly, they have a role, but it's definitely not enough. So, and then again, for if you were to do an awareness raising campaign, what would it be? More cycling. Opportunity is a really important one. So we talk about behavior change, and ultimately what we're trying to do is to give people a chance to experiment with alternative behavior. For instance, we do workshops on the knowledge side. We do workshops on zero carbon living and growing their own vegetables. But we also have a community or 2 community gardens where we just say, come and have a look, stick your fingers in the dirt. This is, try to keep that tomato plant alive. It is much more real than me talking about growing tomatoes. You need to create an opportunity for people, and then you need to allow them to fail. So, and just find the changed behavior that suits them. Now, when translating that to cycling, I was looking at now, admittedly, maybe not incredibly appropriate for here, but this was a Dutch study about, well, what works and how can you get people out of the car? And obviously they've had a different starting point than the Irish side, but what they found that the most effective thing to get people out of their car was to subsidize the purchase of the bike, like we have here. Thank you. But you can also look at other things like companies that provide bicycle parking on the. It not only signals an intent, but it also it helps create the opportunity. You can think about what they tried, just lending people ebikes for not just for the day, but for a couple of days, because again, our learning, I'm sure there's much to say about this, but it takes time to form new habits. So the first few days is just about breaking down your old habits, and then the next while, so about 2-3 weeks, then you build new habits. So if you lend people a bike for a day, it's fun, but it has no lasting impact. But for longer, they get to experiment with it. They get used to going to work by bike. And then there's motivation. So again, we're based in Ballymun. We're talking to people about climate change, etc. Going back to my first slide about the polar bear, and if listening to the news and the radio in Ireland, we all seem to agree that climate change is just about forest fires and floods and heat waves in places where we like to go on holiday. Again, that's sort of the far away show. It actually, it's very sad for those people in Greece and Libya, but it has nothing to do with me. There's not going to be that many floods in Ballymun, let's be honest, or heat waves for that matter. What you need to try and do is to make it connected to lived experiences. So what we do is, well, how about the food that you think is going to be available in 5 years from now? Or do you think it's going to be as cheap as it is now? That insurance that you have, is that going to go? And unfortunately, we've had plenty of experience with people stirring up trouble, trying to blame everything on the foreigners who are living. So because again, where do the refugees go? Not in Dublin 4. They end up in places like so where are the Libyans going to from? Where are they going to go? Well, they should come here. So how are we managing that as a society, etc.? And if you're in Ballymun, well, you already know what the answer is going to be. So sorry, I'm straying from my bicycle being there, but so your motivation is a really important thing, and you have to allow people to make connections to their lives. So when you come to think about bikes, the second most effective thing that they found in that Dutch study was about giving people a bonus for actually using the bike. And the other one that they found really effective was employers, for instance, introduced a mileage scheme for using the bike. Most companies have a mileage scheme for the cars, why not for bikes? You can, I can't read my own. Oh yeah, there's an app also, it's called Burn Fat Not Fuel. We have something similar. We have an app around reducing your carbon footprint. And essentially it's just fun. It's a competition. We learn a lot. It gives you loads of information and facts and all this sort of stuff, but you're actually enjoying using it. So the Burn Fat Not Fuel app is basically the same thing. You're feeling great about how wonderful you are by using your bike. So I suppose in summary, I want to say that the problem that or the mistake maybe that we've also made as environmentalists, maybe as bicycle campaigners as well, is that we tend to be so serious. So I was really happy about the weekend plans. We'll plug that later on again. Because people, most of us want to do the right thing. But again, it's about fairness, opportunity, etc. So where do you make this happen? So you need to make good behavior accessible. You need to make it feasible, but also you need to make the experience meaningful and joyful. So if you can try and make our good cause something that we can actually enjoy, then we're winning. Thank you very much for it.
You should have more.
Oh, I have one more. Oh yeah. Well, that was just basically to say the same thing. System change is what we need. In our public discourse, there's very few people who answer the question, well, how do you get systems change? I believe that the system change will follow behavior change.
Thanks for that. Hans, that was really interesting, and I think it's the language we use is very meaningful, and how we talk about things. We certainly try and talk about the joy of cycling. The event you alluded to, for those of you who weren't here earlier, is that John Whiting has another bike race going on Sunday, so you'll find the details. I'm sure iBike Dublin, our pals, are involved, so you can check that out. And I think some of the Dublin cycling campaign speakers are going to be pressed into action. So that's 2 o'clock on Sunday from TU Dublin to Grange Cormac. So that's about the joy of cycling. But next we have Dr. James Green to come and have a few words with us. So thanks to James coming up from Gold or Limerick. It was
yeah. Yes. So actually, I'm like the standard. Anyone go back? This is the second tier choice. It's a great way to start. So Hans has given you a really great introduction to this, and there's lots of synergies about what he and I are going to talk about. I had the luck of seeing his slides before I started curating mine, and so I thought, seeing as he was doing like a nice high-level thing. And that I was here mostly to talk about behaviour change science and not so much about the project that I'm doing at the moment, that I would go hard. You may have to regret that, and may make your head hurt by the end. Can I have the next slide? So I grew up in a place that's possibly flatter than the Netherlands. I used to go biking down this road. 18.5 kilometres later, there's a T intersection. But that road just goes straight and flat, or pretty much as far as the eye can see, and that was the street that I used to bike down to primary school. Next slide. Then later, I was mostly, so I grew up being like mostly like a sort of a commuting cyclist, and then later I was a bit more of a sort of adventurous cyclist. Next slide. Having a lot of fun in the South Island of New Zealand. Next slide. And then there's a more hilarious introduction, which you obviously didn't find online, which said that I grew up in a very boring flat town and then moved halfway up an extinct volcano. And so when I was living halfway up this extinct volcano, cycling was much less motivating. And as well as being knocked off my bike and ending up in hospital for half a day, the hills also like put me off cycling for the longest time. Next slide. And also, this is allegedly, well, it's in the Guinness Book of Records as the world's steepest street. I used to live in this house here.
Is that the one in San Francisco?
No, it's in Dunedin. It's allegedly steeper than the one in San Francisco. Anyway, next slide. So, long story short, actually, there's this sort of a slightly hilarious detour about how I refound my love of cycling in Los Angeles, of all places. There you have it. You can ask me about that later. So one of the things which I thought, before I get on to the behaviour science, maybe this slide could have been later, is why electric? And so actually I was wearing my rainwear tonight, and why do I have a particular thing about electric bikes? So unexpectedly, Limerick has really terrible traffic, like unspeakably terrible traffic. I'm not saying it's worse than Dublin, but if you come from somewhere that's not around here, you're like, what is wrong with this place? Why are people not cycling? This is intolerable. So it rapidly came to my awareness that I couldn't get to work without a bike. Like cycling wasn't an option, walking wasn't an option, buses were stuck in traffic. And some of my colleagues, yesterday it took them 1 hour and 40 minutes to get off campus. That was before they even, they were just getting off campus. Anyway, so I needed to be able to bike on the coldest, wettest, winteriest, most horrible day. And so I thought, although I've been biking up these steep hills, I thought an electric bike was the answer. Next slide. Okay. Oh, actually the animation has worked on this. That's very cool. So this is very similar to the knowledge, opportunity and motivation thing that Hans was just talking about. So there are some kind of like theoretical models of behaviour change, but of recent, some of the more popular models that have come around have been kind of like to look across all of these different theories and kind of like pull them together into kind of like a big framework. If you just want to, I think there's going to be animations, but just like make them pop up. So the capability, so they think about physical capability, so has sufficient fitness to be able to bike, psychological capability, you know, how to ride a bike. Motivations can be both automatic and reflective. So the automatic ones like habits, again, feelings of fear or apprehension around cycling. And then also the more conscious or reflective ones like setting goals or planning. And then the opportunity can also be sort of like social norms, which we've also heard a little bit about. And then also physical opportunities as well. Do you have a bike? Do you have access to a bike? That's cycling infrastructure. Next slide. And that's also been pulled together. So this is mostly the same thing pulled together in a wheel. I kind of forget what the specific point of the wheel is. I used to have a physical wheel. Like this is like a, I don't know what you call those things, but you can actually spin the discs. Oh, yeah. But the thing which I quite like about this is, and also something that Hans touched on, is the idea that you come from kind of like personal level motivations kind of out into, in this case, intervention things, and then also kind of like the policy influence on the top. So I think that's like a nice way. And so I put the links in here, because I mean, I could talk about, I had like a half hour of a lecture on this. So I'm not doing that for you today. We're just skipping through this at blistering speed. Next slide. So this again, not to scare you, but so this was the behaviour change top taxonomy version 1, which had 93 hierarchically clustered techniques. So as part of this, they're trying to think about what are all the different ways that we can help people, help change people's behaviour. And so distressingly, I was at a conference last week, and Susan Mickey from University College London has just updated this, and I think she now has like 190 or something. Anyway, but if you follow the QR code, you can get into this if you really want to get down into the weeds. Can I even see them? Oh, here's one. So self-monitoring of behaviour. So that would be like the looking at the trip counter on your bike, or if you're using an app. And so there are all, so it's basically thinking about what are all the different kind of ways in which we can kind of like try and work on changing people. How can you kind of like think about those in a structured way? So then you've got like rewarding completion, so like getting paid for doing cycling. And so the idea is that all of these sorts of things, you can start to kind of like map them together in a structured fashion. Anyway, sorry, this is like a terrifying slide. But actually, to cut to the point, only 24 of these have been used for cycling, and actually there's a much smaller subset. Anyway, so we'll go on to the next slide and we'll try and make it a bit less terrifying. So in science, one of the best things you can come across is a systematic review and meta-analysis where they summarize lots of other people's work. I was just having a drink with this guy actually on Friday night in Germany, randomly enough. Next slide. Actually, let's skip past this because it's too horrible. Excellent. So we'll just go with the text summary. So interestingly, they looked at like a lot of papers and these 24 different things. And so the thing which they found that was the most effective was encouraging people to self-monitor their behaviour. So to reflect on potentially the amount of cycling that you're doing, but also maybe the amount of driving that you're doing. So different studies might have implemented this in different ways, but they found that self-monitoring was the strongest. The other thing which they found that was really useful was adding objects to the environment, which in the case of cycling is things like the provision of bike racks, bike share schemes, and bikes. The other thing, which is a bit shocking, I should have asked him about this. They didn't find an effect for this restructuring the physical environment.
But that's what we push for.
Yeah.
Well, so I think if I read the paper correctly, his argument is that you can't just restructure the physical environment, you have to do it as part of like a suite of changes. And that just putting cycle lanes in is not the only thing to do. There was also some other caveats around that a lot of the ones that measured putting in cycle lanes often used like quite different types of outcome measures. So I probably could have like put more asterisks and footnotes under that. But that was one of the key takeaways from that. And that would be quite surprising. The other interesting thing, given I just showed you that terrifying thing, they didn't find that having more behaviour change ingredients were helpful. So it wasn't that if you so you don't need to have like an enormous number, you could have like a relatively small number. And they also didn't find any evidence that theory-guided interventions were better than ones cooked up without reference to theory, which is good because that means you don't need to read any theory. Maybe. Anyway, sorry. Next slide.
Just explain that point there again, the theory-guided one. Just explain that. I'm just wondering where it is.
So Hans had the theory of planned behaviour up there, which was the idea that subjective norms and these other things cause intention, which causes behaviour. And so they would then say that if you wanted to change people's intention, then you could, for example, work on changing their subjective norms, and that would then influence their intention, which would change their behaviour. And so you could try and change people's subjective norms, but you could not do that from kind of like a theory-driven perspective. And so in the sort of the scientific literature, some papers would come from like a very strong theoretical background, and some papers would not come from a strong theoretical background. And so they didn't find that theory-guided interventions were necessarily better than non-theory-guided interventions.
What's BCT?
Oh, sorry, I realised that I should have spelled that out. That was all of the behaviour change techniques in that big list that I showed before. I did this at a little bit of speed, partially on the train. So I guess my particular thing of interest is looking at those type of things where you loan people e-bikes for a period of time. So I'm just going to cover off probably the three biggest asbestos ones that I'm aware of. So this trial was conducted, I think, centrally in a Volvo factory in Sweden, a Volvo truck factory. And people got loaned a relatively, it's certainly not a top range sort of e-bike. They've got like a front hub motor and a rear carrier battery, which wouldn't be a sort of like your premium one. So they're not particularly high spec. They were loaned their e-bike for 5 weeks. So this is the 12.5 adding objects. But they also did the self-monitoring. I don't think they're aware of doing it, but they had to log all of their trips in an app. And for some reason, I don't have the results on this slide. But so the interesting thing was they did find that people who had the e-bike drove less and they cycled more, but it wasn't like a one-for-one replacement. So it might be, so what I mean is that they probably replaced long car trips with shorter cycling trips. So if you're driving, you might go to Tesco, which is further away because it's cheaper. But if you're biking, you might go to like a different supermarket, which is closer to you. So they did find substitution, which is, I guess, what researchers in this area mostly want to see, people replacing car trips with cycling trips. And they were basically replacing on average about 1 trip a day and cutting down, I think, about 6.5 kilometres of driving each day, which is pretty good if you're thinking about that's like every day on average across 5 weeks. Next slide, please. There's another one. I've actually, I know why this slide's brief. So there's another quite interesting study. So this is taking part currently in Grenoble in France, which is quite a hilly city. And so in this intervention, if you get randomized to the intervention condition, you get potentially 6 months of free public transport and or a free e-bike and or a free normal bike for 6 months. And I just caught up with the people running this again last week at a conference. And so not too much information coming out of this yet. But interestingly, most of the people in their study already had a conventional bike, so they had really strong uptake of the e-bikes and not that many people interested in public transport. So it'll be really interesting. It's probably like another year until we'll see that. So their main intervention is sort of like the adding objects. Next slide.
So can I just clarify? So they randomly picked out citizens of the city.
Yes.
And gave them one or more of
Yeah.
those 3 interventions.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So they can actually have all of them, I think. Actually, I don't know if you get I think you definitely get an e-bike and free public transport.
Yeah.
I don't think you get 2 bikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they also did like a relatively bananas amount of other stuff. So they had like a couple of hours in-person meetings with trained people doing motivational interviewing, talking about the salience of consequences. They gave them personalized transport advice. They did goal setting. They did action planning. So once you've got a goal, what actions are you going to take to enact your goal? They did problem solving to remove obstacles prevention. They did weekly text message interventions for 3 months, and then, whoops, I misspelled bi-monthly, for the last 3 months, about reviewing outcomes, about habit formation, and about self-monitoring of outcomes. And so I'm excited to see how this study will turn out, but I don't feel like this intervention is scalable. Like if you wanted to make really big national change across like multiple cities, you're not going to have like enormous teams of people who can go around and spend like a couple of hours talking to everybody. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so I don't know how am I going for time? I'm probably talking for far too long. Okay, so Hans was talking about habits. So I'm also particularly interested in habits. And so the habit literature suggests that on average, it takes about 66 days to form a new habit. And some habits are easy to form, some habits are harder to form, and there's also individual variation. So some people find it easier to form new habits, some people find it harder to form new habits. So one of the main things about the study that I'm running, which I haven't told you about yet, is that we randomise people to get their e-bike for either 4, 8, or 12 weeks. And so we're interested to see whether that duration has an influence, and if you were going to kind of like scale up this type of intervention, how long would it need to be? Next slide. So when you leave the house, do you actively choose your mode of transport? Next slide. Okay, so when you leave the house and take your car, which possibly none of you do, what do you need to do before you take off in your car?
Take your
Keys. Anything else?
Be dressed.
Yeah, you should probably be dressed and behave. You should technically have your driver's license, yes. Yeah. What about if you leave the house by your bike? Lock.
Raincoat.
keys.
Raincoat. Keys.
Can you bring your bicycle out of the house?
Bring your bicycle. Yeah, often it's much harder.
Bike lights.
Yeah. Speak of bike lights, you have to be dressed. Actually, no, maybe there's a new cycling group that does them. Anyway, sorry. Wait, this has gone to a dark place. Anyway, okay, you can follow the next one. Yeah. So basically, there's all of these things which you need to do. I think also thinking about where you can carry everything that you plan to do on your trip. And so I think this is one of the big barriers for people who are thinking about making active changes, is that there's all this stuff that you need to do before you can leave the house if you're taking your bike. And you know, often getting your bike out is really inconvenient relative to your car's just parked in the driveway. Next slide. So this is a horrible, horrible slide. I told you I had lots of horrible slides. Anyway, so this is going for a run rather than going for cycling. But basically, the point you decide to go to the run, go for a run, you need to put on your sneakers, leave the house, walk to the park, run around the house, walk home, enter house. And the same kind of thing for cycling. So when you go to leave the house, there's sort of like a choice about how you go, and then there's a bunch of things which you need to do later. And so with driving, there is this thing that basically you just grab your keys and walk out the door. And it's much more complex if you have to do some other tasks. So there's a question in the scientific literature about whether it's making the initial choice or whether it's how hard it is to do the chain of things afterwards. Next slide. So thankfully, in this cool study, they discovered that it was the instigation, the making the choice was the biggest thing. So they looked at a simple task, I can't remember what it was, and their complicated task was taking public transport. But it was sort of like the instigation and not like how hard was it to do. Because I mean, taking public transport is the same. You have to think about the timetables, you have to think about how you're going to get to the bus stop or the lower stop, and whether it's raining and all that sort of thing, and how you're going to get home. Next slide. Okay, so our project, we're adding objects. We're giving people e-bikes for quite a long time. And we're also particularly excited about giving people lots of different types of e-bikes to try, because we think that, especially for parents and perhaps for women in particular, that trip chaining, dropping kids to school, going to the supermarket, cars tend to facilitate these things very well, and different types of bikes might be better for facilitating people into these things. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we have lots of different bikes. Next, well, pressing in. Show off the bikes. And we have lots of different bits, and we've got even more bits than that. No, that's fine. So we've got lots of different bits to give people. These bikes are actually much more accessorized up. I don't know what, we should have pictures which show them with more bling on them, to be honest. Anyway, next slide.
I want to be part of this study.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically we sign people up. We monitor their travel behaviour for 2 weeks. They get randomised either into waitlist control, boo-hoo, they don't get a bike for a while, or they get a bike for a certain amount of time. Then we take the bike back off them, and then we will follow them up after a year. Okay, I meant to delete the slide anyway. So we've got 100 and something people. Actually, I think this is actually old, so we'll just go past this. Well past 100 at this point. Lots of people coming back with really lots of fun stories. So many people are worried about the security of their bikes and parking and the weather and weight. Next slide. Already having some fun with the GPS data. So the 1.5 hour wait yesterday was from about there to there. It's like really not very far, and you can like bike it in like 3 minutes. In fact, I did a time-lapse movie going past it, but I'm a bit afraid about posting on social media because I think I'll get quite a lot of hate. But yeah, just really interesting seeing where people go and where they don't. Oh, there's a cycle lane which just really arbitrarily stops here, as you might be familiar with. And so funnily enough, people turn in there on the inbound journey and then come out this way rather than going down this bit where there's no cycle lane.
Is that Limerick?
Yeah.
See well.
Yeah, so that's UL from there. Next slide. Oh yeah, and this is the middle of Limerick. So already seeing some ideas about like where are the key cycling routes.
So it's
Are these your bikes, sorry?
Yeah, these are my bikes. Yeah.
And yellow is more people.
Yes. Yeah. So yellow, and I think it eventually gets to like red eventually. Yeah.
And how does that compare with the bus connect plans for Limerick? Do you know?
This is like super preliminary data. Yeah. So I think the bus connects, they're thinking about making this bridge into a bus and cycle only bridge. So we do see people going over there.
It's a lot more good.
Is the other one where they put in the?
Yes, so the other one is just where they put in the cycle lane, which is very controversial. shockingly.
Well, you know.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, it's quite interesting. One of the reasons why I've started doing these up is every time we're submitting to council consultations now, we can be like, look, there are people cycling down here. Well, they're not cycling down there, but this is why they're going around this other route because this is horrible. Right, next one. Okay, this is also fun. So this is like not driving, but this is where the bikes are stopped. So there's a very beautiful, secure parking hub there. But it's in quite an annoying location, and so shockingly, people are parking in places which are closer to where they need to be. So we're also hoping to.
So they say about security, but their actions.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I don't. Yeah. Okay. Next one.
Convenience is more important.
Okay. So we also have a work package about the environmental aspects of e-biking. So what happens to e-bikes when they die? Are the batteries recycled? How long do they last? How do the batteries go? We're also doing some physiology stuff, looking at e-biking as physical activity, thinking about why people choose to e-bike, some stuff about equity of access, and we also have some stuff underway on older people's experience of e-biking. Next slide. So just a really big thank you to all of my colleagues involved in this project, who I wouldn't be here talking about all this fun stuff without them.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, James and Hans. I found that really interesting. I think